Okay, welcome to this week's Haftarah class. This week is Parshat Devarim. I don't want us to lose track of the Parsha, but we are still in the 10-week period in which we're focused on the calendar, not the Parsha reading. So this is the third and final of the three uh, Haftarot of affliction or of mourning on some level. And then Tisha B'Av will come on Tuesday night, Wednesday, and then we will read the first Haftarah of the Nechemta, the Shivta Nechemta of consolation next Shabbat. And then there are 6 more that bring us up to Rosh Hashanah. So we're going to miss the first one, but we'll switch gears to the second one next time. But this is the third and final one of this 3-week period. I'm going to share my screen. So interestingly, there is a discussion in the Gemara about this Haftarah, right? As you know, I'm so interested in how we come to pick the Haftarah that we read. So I wanted to think a second about why we chose this Haftarah for this Parsha, right? We always read Devarim before Tisha B'Av, the Shabbat before Tisha B'Av. And we always read this portion from Yeshayahu as the Haftarah. But that was not always clear cut from the very beginning. So before we dive into the Haftarah, I just want to look at how we chose it. And I spared us some longer later halachic resources, but I think that this is really interesting, right? So the question is, when Rosh Chodesh Av falls on Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh Av shechal lihiot b'Shabbat, maftirin chadshechem u'modechem san'a nafshi hayalu alayla tarach. So what they're saying is that we read this portion of Yeshayahu of Perek Aleph when Tisha B'Av, Rosh Chodesh Av falls on Shabbat. Now, what does that mean? It means that we are not yet in the week of mourning, right? We're because by nature of the fact that it's Rosh Chodesh, there's going to be 9 days, so there'll be one more Shabbat beforehand. So what the Mishnah Megillah the Gemara Megillah is saying is that this is if Rosh Chodesh falls on Shabbat, this is the second Haftarah, not the third one, according to the Mishnah at this moment. And the Gemara asks, why would we read My Hayu Alayla Tarach? Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Lo Dayan Lahem LiYisrael Shochotin Lefanai. Right? God says, what is it that they say? What does it mean? It's a burden to me. Well, the Gemara explains that God says it's not enough for the Jewish people that they sin before me. But in addition, they burden me to reconsider what harsh decree I shall bring upon them. It's an interesting thing, thinking about how these 10 weeks sort of are leading us towards the Yamim Noraim, this idea that the burden is not just that we deserve the punishment, but that we then ask for mercy on some level. And so that's why we would read Yeshayahu at this time. However, the Tosfot comes to tell us on our daf of Megillah that this is not the way we do it. And so he says, actually, right, we read a Haftarah from Yirmiyahu, but from a different section of Yirmiyahu on the Shabbat before Tisha B'Av, and then we read Chazon Yeshayahu on the third week, right? So he says, so Tosfot comes to say, even if Rosh Chodesh, which it didn't happen to do this year, right? This year it was Sunday night, Monday, but if it had happened to be on Shabbat, we would have read from Yirmiyahu, the Shim'u, what we read last week. And this week we read Chazon Yeshayahu, basically saying the 3 weeks are set no matter when Rosh Chodesh falls. We don't do anything special if Rosh Chodesh is on Shabbat when it is Rosh Chodesh Av, right? We know that there's a special Rosh Chodesh Maftir that we've looked at before, if Rosh Chodesh, Nisan fell on Shabbat, but for Rosh Chodesh Av, we stick to the 3-week schedule, is what Tosfot says, right? And the reason is that we are accustomed on the basis of the Pesikta, so that's the Midrash, a very old custom to read the 3 Haftarot of Doom, is how they're translated here, the Shalosh de Puranuta, Kodem Tisha B'Av, right before Tisha B'Av, Ve'elu hen divrei Yirmiyahu, Shim'u Davar Hashem, Chazon Yeshayahu. So those are the 3. That's sort of the way that Tosfot breaks them down, like this older framing, right? 1 is Divrei Yirmiyahu, that's the first parak of Yirmiyahu. 2 is Shim'u Davar Hashem. 3 is our Haftarah here. So and it seems like Tosfot is going to win. By the way, again, if we'd wanted to sort of explore just how we chose this week's Haftarah, the Rambam actually thinks that we should stick with the order of Megillah, but Tosfot ends up winning out. And he gives a reason, and I want us to keep it in mind because I think we're going to circle all the way back to this at the end, which is that he says, we do not read the Haftarah of Chazon, this Chazon Yeshayahu, on Shabbat Rosh Chodesh Av, because we maintain that there is mourning only during the week of Tisha B'Av. So it seems like on some level, the purpose of Chazon Yeshayahu is mourning, right? And typically we don't mourn on Shabbat publicly, so we wouldn't read this Haftarah in Shul. But some say that it's appropriate in the week of Tisha B'Av, right? So Chazon Yeshayahu is always going to be in the week of Tisha B'Av. That's just sort of the nature of how it falls out, because that's a public mourning example. Right, Rav, who says that we read the Haftarah Chazon, maintains that mourning begins immediately with Rosh Chodesh. Right, so in Megillah, it seems like they're saying, well, as soon as it turns Rosh Chodesh in the 9 days, we can mourn publicly. But because we as a community have decided to only elevate our mourning to this level on during the week of Tisha B'Av, that's why we only read Chazon Yeshayahu. So it seems that on some level, this is not just of doom or rebuke or punishment, but there is a level of mourning that starts as well. Okay, so that's how we landed on Yeshayahu. Everyone reads Yeshayahu. It's not like the Rambam's opinion is expressed in any community today. And I broke it down. I love color coding. I took advantage of the opportunity to do that. The Haftarah really breaks down into 5 paragraphs, and you can see it in the Hebrew, right? The pays, the closed pays, and the closed samachs indicate paragraph breaks. And so I did the same colors in English and Hebrew so that we can sort of keep track. So what I want to do is I don't want to go through every word of the Haftarah. I did it stacked up and down so that you could see the colors better. And since we're not going to go through every sentence, hopefully that's okay. But we'll pick and choose to sort of pick out what is interesting about each paragraph. Okay, so paragraph 1 is the introduction. Right, it's the Chazon Yeshayahu. This is the vision of Yeshayahu ben Amotz. Interestingly, Amotz in Megillah, earlier on in Masechet Megillah, is thought to be a prophet in his own right. So Yeshayahu comes from like a very high aristocratic social level in society. He is the son of a prophet and perhaps the nephew of another kind of political leader. We know that he has a wife and 3 children. We know a lot about Yeshayahu. And interestingly, here they help us date where we are, right? So Yeshayahu ben Amotz asher chazal al Yehuda v'Yerushalayim b'yamei Uzziah Yotam Achaz Yechizkiyahu Malchei Yehuda. So it lists out the kings under which Yeshayahu prophesies. So he is a contemporary of Hosea and of Amos. And he prophesies about 150 years before the destruction of the temple. Right, so we are talking a significant amount of time before Eicha, right? And Eicha is there's no author officially, signed for Eicha, but many think it's Yirmiyahu. So we read the contemporary time of Eicha the first 2 weeks of the 3 weeks, and now we've gone back in time about 150 years. It's possible. It's a little bit unclear. Rashi has trouble dating where we are in Yeshayahu's prophesizing. He prophesizes for many decades. It seems that this is a later prophecy, right after the destruction of the Northern Kingdom, because we don't talk about the Northern Kingdom here. And then we sort of go back to the beginning of his time later on in the parak. So this is the story, Yeshayahu is the main character, time at 150 years prior to this destruction. And in his introduction, Yeshayahu is calling on the Shamayim, is calling on the heavens, v'ha'azinu ha'aretz, and the earth to witness the testimony of what he's about to say. And what is this thing he's about to say is how terrible Bnei Israel is, right? How difficult they have been. Right? People laden with iniquity, brood of evildoers, depraved children, right? They have turned their backs on God. This is, it's a terrible beginning to the story in that way. And then Yeshayahu turns in the second closed paragraph. He turns his audience from the heavens and the earth as witness to his testimony, to talking directly to Bnei Israel, right? Shim'u davar Hashem. You should listen to the word of God. And he calls them the officers of Sodom, Kitsinei Sodom, which is a very strong thing to say, right? To think about why we would be compared to Sodom. Is it the things that we have done that are so terrible? Or like our actions have become like them? Or is it sort of like a when you live like Sodom, you die like Sodom kind of thing, right? Yeshaya was saying you brought this upon yourself. When you started acting like Sodom, you knew what happened to Sodom and Amorah. We had a warning and we chose not to take it. So it turns, Yeshayahu is turning to the people. He's saying God is not going to come. And he calls upon a theme that we saw in Yirmiyahu. So I just wanted to highlight it here. Right, God says, I hate the sacrifices you're bringing, right? Like many of the Nevi'im, and I think totally a theme of the Tisha B'Av season is stop turning to me and acting so holy and then going and doing terrible things outside of the Beit HaMikdash, right? And so he says, look, the thing that you have done, what is the thing you've done that's so bad that makes you like Sodom is that you bring me lots of sacrifices, but you turn away from the orphan and the widow. You don't devote yourself to justice. You don't aid the wronged, right? You are not doing enough ahavat chinam in your life. Right, and that is the problem, right? Lamdu hetev dirshu mishpat ashrenu chamotz shiftu yatom rivu almana. This is a heavy charge. It's a social charge, and it is certainly in line with the Nevi'im that we read on these days and on your keyboard, right? Stop focusing on me, God says, and to the people. That's how you will do better. And so now the third paragraph, the little blue paragraph, is going to be the turning point, right? Because like all Haftarot, we don't want to end on a bad note. We have to sort of start to turn the corner. And so this is a charge to change, right? Yeshayahu is saying it's not too late. You can still change, right? Let us reach an understanding, says God, right? This is still very much a father-child, parent-child metaphor. Your sins might be red, but they can turn white. They might be wool, but they can become fleece, right? You can do the right thing and you can turn the corner. But before bringing us to that sort of happy ending, we read the word Eicha. And I meant to say at the beginning that the first 4 paragraphs are all traditionally, and I think this is what we do at Skokie Valley, read in the Nusach of Eicha. So the morning cantillation. And we switch at paragraph 5 back to the regular Haftarah cantillation. So there is certainly an element of that public mourning that we talked about at the beginning here, right? And Yeshayahu asks here, Eicha hayta lazona, right? How did the city become like a zona, like a whore, right? A faithful city that has become unfaithful to God. And again, stressing that the things we have done wrong are about being greedy for gifts to the orphan and the widow who we have turned our backs to. And so these are the terrible, right, sins of injustice within our society. But then we end on a very triumphant note, right? Right? God will take mercy on us. Will return God's hand to us. Right? We will turn back as we were before. And after that, we will again be called Ir Tzion. Yikra lach ir hatzedek kira ne'amana Tzion b'mishpat tifte v'shivya b'tzedakah. Right, so it's not too late. That certainly seems to be the message of the very end of this prophecy, is or where we choose to end this prophecy. And I think this is interesting to me, is that in the spirit of public mourning, in the spirit of preparing for Eicha, which will take place within 7 days of this Haftarah, we could have just ended in the Eicha paragraph. We could have ended in the Eicha cancellation, right? We could have just sort of smoothly gone into Tisha B'Av, but there is always this interesting push and pull, I think, in the Haftarot, and where we want to be able to say it's going to get better. And I think that to do this 150 years before the destruction is really interesting, right? It's not time for consolation yet because we haven't had the thing happen to us yet. But Yeshayahu is almost saying it's like a foregone conclusion. Even if you could change, you're not going to, and we have to wait. So I want to pause there. I feel like I've just talked for so many minutes. Before the last piece I want to look at is the three echas that we read. Okay, so Eicha Rabbah, so speaking about the Megillah of Eicha, talks about how there are three Eichas, and we're going to read them all by the time we reach Tisha B'Av, so within the next week. And so what does he say? Shlosha nitnavu belashon Eicha. Three have prophesied by using the word Eicha. Moshe is the first, so we're going to read about him in the Torah reading this week. Yeshayahu, that's the second, and that's in our Haftarah, the Yirmiyahu. And that's the third, which is the Eicha Rabbah understands Yirmiyahu to be the author of Eicha, and that's the third one. So just a quick reminder, right, is that the first is Eicha asa levadi, right? Moshe is complaining to God and he says, how can I bear this alone? So what I would think about is like here is Moshe being frustrated, but it's not like a true terrible time, right? Then in our parsha we saw Eicha, our Haftarah, and then you right, as we'll read on Tuesday night, right, it says Eicha yashva badad. How have we become a great city that sits alone? And Rabbi Levi has an interesting mashal for us. He says it's a mashal lematrona shahayu la shlosha shosh vinin. This is about a woman, a noble woman, but I think it could really be about a noble man too. It's about a person of great stature who has three friends at three different times in her or his life. The first one sees her in her completeness, her tranquility, and that's Moshe, right? Even though Moshe is complaining, even though there's some cracks, maybe, Moshe is complaining at a time where Bnei Israel is like really at they're about to have their highest points, right? They're about to conquer the land of Israel to go in as a nation. Then the Achad Ra'aota be'pachazuta. The next one sees her in her debauchery, on her way down, right? And that is our Haftarah, 150 years before the destruction. Yeshayahu is saying, you're in trouble, but you could still, straighten yourself out. The Achad Ra'aota be'nivula. And the last one sees her in her disgrace, right? By Eicha time, it's all over. We're sitting in such horrible sadness. And I think that this idea of the stages of sort of the cracking or the destruction is to say, what is the mourning that we're doing here, right? If we follow that idea that there's some kind of public mourning during our Haftarah, we're not mourning the end. We're not mourning the destruction. We're mourning the moment where we could have fixed it all, right? I think that that's very powerful. The tragedy is what could have been, not what actually happened. If we wanted it to be what actually happened, we could have read Yirmiyahu this week. But what we wanted to do is to position ourselves to read about what could have happened, right? This is a moment 150 years before where God says, let us reach an understanding. Let's change. Let's let the things, the good things come about. And yet we can't stop ourselves. Even though we're only at the middle Eicha, we're not able to turn it around. And that's the tragedy that we really see here. And so I think that when we think about what is the role of Tisha B'Av today, at a time where it's hard to know, are we in Yeshayahu Eicha or Yirmiyahu Eicha? Like, are we at the really tragic point, or are we at a point where we could change things if we cared for the people around us, right? If we devoted ourselves to justice, if we learned to do good. And so I think that reading Yeshayahu is actually such a powerfully hopeful message at this time, in addition to highlighting the tragedy of not paying attention to the signs in front of us. And Yeshayahu is here to inspire us to turn things around before they get worse. Because things can always get worse, right? As bad as we think they are. And that we are in a moment, and I feel that today, we're in a moment where who knows what will happen next. And if we can embrace the ideology of Yeshayahu here, the chazon of Yeshayahu, that there was a chance to turn it around, could be a very powerful message. And we can choose to focus on the tragedy over Tisha B'Av, or we can choose to focus on how we can change things for this next cycle of friends, that this noble person has visit them. So I think it can be both, and that's also reflected in the cancellation. It is Eicha cancellation and Haftarah cancellation. It is mourning, but it is also maybe a brief peek at hope, if we can change things. I was listening to a blog. I guess I'll finish with this. I was listening to a blog, a podcast that someone shares on the Haftarah, and he said, if Tisha B'Av should come, it will come on Tuesday night, Wednesday, right? With this idea that like we never know, Mashiach could come tomorrow, and there'll be no more Tisha B'Avs, and so if we can sort of keep ourselves focused forward, even if it sometimes feels like silly to say, right, that if Tisha B'Av comes, it will come on Wednesday, is a very powerful message, and I think maybe encapsulated within our Haftarah. Okay, I'm going to stop talking and stop the share so we can see each other's faces better, and I would love to hear what other people have to say. No thoughts.
Yeah, I side with Isaiah. I'm the optimist. Even if you have to cry and complain, it has to be a light at the end of the tunnel.
Hmm.
And Isaiah, I think, provides that. I think both are right. Jeremiah is right for lament, Book of Lamentations. We have to go through that stage, but then comes the resilience, the recovery. And
yes, the resilience. I think that's such a good word for our time, and what Yeshayahu is offering us, right? A chance at being resilient. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And as Kohelet says, a different Megillah for a different time, right? But there's a time for everything. So it's important to set aside Tisha B'Av for mourning, especially at night, but then to remember the Haftarah's call to turn the next day. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's like Kubler-Ross images
Yeah,
of mourning. You go from Jeremiah and then acceptance and recovery. And there must be a way to have to formulate.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I think that the Haftarah's refusal to end on a sad note is in some ways not acceptance, right? It's like wallpapering over the mold.
Yeah.
In some ways.
Yeah. I like to say that after acceptance comes growth. You get out to the next stage. But you have to accept first and then dwell into it and then move on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that the dwelling on Tisha B'Av is good and healthy in a lot of ways to take that time.
Yeah.
And this year especially, right, is such a hard year. I know that at Shul they'll be playing Eileen, gosh, her last name is escaping me at this moment, but she recently passed away, a dear beloved member of our community who was a Holocaust survivor. They'll be playing her testimony on Tisha B'Av in the afternoon for anyone who wants to join, right? It's a time to sort of sit in that sadness, no matter who the person, no matter how far we've come since then. I'm just trying to find her last name. It's going to bother me otherwise. But
is it Himmelman?
Yes, thank you, Eileen Himmelman. Zichronah Livracha. Right, so we'll play her testimony and we'll listen to some new Eicha keynotes from the area, and we'll dwell in our sadness. And I think that there's an important space for that and the Eicha cancellation, even on Shabbat during the Shavua Shechalba, the time when Tisha B'Av will come. And there's an appropriate time to then say it's time to get up and to move on. And I think that choosing Yeshayahu, who is so far before the true tragedy, is it's an interesting reflection on this, right? It's almost out of order, I would say, Nelson, right? The sadness comes first, then the acceptance, then the moving on.
Yeah.
And Yeshayahu is asking us to accept and move on before we've even experienced the tragedy so that we can avoid it. but without success. So,
Hmm.
hmm,
I I don't know, we behave as if that the destruction of the temples, that's the tragedies. But it seems to me that the Israelites were always facing some battle or other. They were always surrounded by hostile or at least disagreeable um, communities.
hmm,
And we kind of skip over as we read through the Torah all these other battles or skirmishes they had along the way, and how many people they were killing, and how many people were killed amongst themselves. And
hmm,
um, it seems to me that in any generation, those words would have hit home. Um, the 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 signs of divine uh, disappointment in the people's behavior,
hmm,
and I don't know. I feel it even more in our own times. The things that have happened over the last few years are really biblical if you add them all up. The weather challenges, the war challenges,
hmm,
political strife, and internal, external. How much is it going to take for people to um, come up with the response that the real way out is to take God's advice seriously and treat each other the way we've been enjoined to treat each other,
hmm,
and not depend entirely on the weapons. And thinking of the book of Judges, the leaders who will lead us into battle, but are not necessarily prepared to lead us out of the battle mentality into
hmm,
a post-war society building
hmm,
venture.
hmm. And I
So
think the role of the
150 years
Navi,
before, it's not soon enough.
yes, yes, I totally agree. And I think the role of the Navi is to balance out that judge at this, right? Or the king or whoever, right? The Navi is that moral clarion call that we often feel is missing, right? How to do it. And again, the Navi is consistent sort of throughout time. Each Navi hammers it in, saying, stop with all the sacrifices, start treating each other well. That's the way forward. And that's not to say that sacrifices aren't important, but to think that they will substitute for this
Rely
peaceful.
solely.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the key. So I hope that your Tisha B'Av is meaningful and not too difficult, and we can hear that call. However, it comes to us. I think Solo is doing a project in the building. Also, there's a lot going on over Tisha B'Av, and that we can come out of it, as Nelson said, ready to move forward to start building again. So,
There's a psychological term for what Nelson was describing, post-traumatic growth.
hmm,
People, there's an article from a psychology study focusing on this one individual survivor of the Afghan war who came back severely damaged. He was
hmm,
paraplegic or something. And he'd been a career military man.
hmm,
And you'd think that he'd succumb to depression or something. But he discovered interests he never knew he had, studied, went back to school, became a professional in this new field.
hmm,
And he was a poster boy for this
hmm,
observation that some people talk about acceptance, they open their eyes to what they've missed all along and grow into something new. And that's really very
hmm.
inspiring.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whose idea this is originally. I heard it from the Rosh Yeshiva, Yeshivat Maharat, Rabbi Fox. But he talks about that cycle within Jewish life as well, right? Out of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash came the Gemara,
Mm.
out of the destruction of the Holocaust came the state of Israel, right? That it takes that sort of down to sometimes create new things. And it's a hard question, right? To say like, is it worth it is a hard sort of maybe philosophical question. But maybe to say hard things will happen, right? As you said, Judith, even if it's not the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, there is anti-Semitism, there are, difficulties along the way at every stage. And to make the most of them, to be able to use them to learn and to grow, that's maybe the challenge that we have to take upon us, not on Tisha B'Av, but on Yud B'Av, right? Not on Tisha B'Av, but on the next day. So I wish everyone a meaningful Tisha B'Av and a meaningful next day, and I look forward to coming back together in a week from Tuesday. And I think we'll be back to our normal time. So keep an eye out for the announcement, and I look forward to seeing everyone.
Well, thanks for making it more meaningful for all of us.
Maine.
Yes.
Okay, have a good night. Shabbat Shalom.